Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've lived on my family's farm property for as long as I can remember. My grandparents started the place in the 1950s, and my parents took it over in the 80s after they got married. I was born and raised here, learning how to care for the land and animals from my dad. When my parents retired and moved to Florida, they handed the property over to me. It's not a huge farm, just 40 acres of land with a nice ranch house, barn, and some fields where we grow corn and hay. I love this place with all my heart. The rolling hills, the woods out back where I used to play as a kid, the feeling of peace that I get looking out at the land around sunrise and sunset. This farm is my home and my livelihood. I've put years of sweat and toil into caring for the land and maintaining what my grandparents built. Last year, I finally decided to take a long overdue vacation to Europe. My neighbor Jack offered to keep an eye on the farm for me while I was gone. Jack's family owns the property right next to mine. We've known each other since we were kids. I figured I could trust him to just do the basic chores, like feeding the animals and checking the irrigation system while I was away for 3 weeks. Boy, was I wrong about that. I returned from Europe exhausted but recharged from my travels. As the cab drove down the long gravel road leading to my house, I looked out expecting to see the familiar fields and structures that I'd known my whole life on this property. Instead, I was shocked to see a huge construction area dug up near my house, with multiple bulldozers, excavators, and construction equipment working away. I told the cab driver to stop, and I got out, marching over to the scene. "What the hell is going on here?" I yelled, getting the attention of the construction crew. They told me I'd have to speak with the owner. Figuring this was some kind of mistake, I went to go find Jack. When I got to his house and started pounding on the door, I was even more stunned when a woman I didn't recognize answered. She had no idea who I was and said that Jack had sold her and her husband the property a few weeks ago. Now thoroughly confused, I asked if I could speak with Jack. The woman informed me that Jack had moved with his new girlfriend to somewhere out west. He left her and her husband in charge of overseeing the construction project that was underway. Now I was really suspicious, so I demanded to see the sale paperwork on the property. The woman hesitated, but eventually went inside and came back out with a deed. I scrutinized the document and immediately could tell it was fake. The notary stamp wasn't from our county, and my family still owned this land. There was no record of a sale or transfer of the deed. I called the cops right away, and soon a couple of deputies showed up. They took my statement and also confirmed that the deed presented by the woman was fraudulent. The construction crew was trespassing on my private property. We figured out later that Jack had drawn up the phony deeds to make this woman think she was the new legal owner in some kind of scam. Things got even crazier when the cops told the construction crew to stop work. The foreman came over and pointed at the huge dirt mound that they had excavated near my house. He claimed Jack had hired them to build an underground luxury hurricane bunker, complete with a pool and water slide. I was absolutely stunned. Jack had illegally sold my property, falsely claimed that the woman and her husband were the new owners, then commissioned this ridiculous underground mansion to be built, all while I was out of the country. The only reason the construction crew even believed him was because he'd been my neighbor for so long that they figured if he said he owned the place now, it must be true. To say I was livid would be an understatement. This was a complete violation of my trust. Jack totally took advantage of my trip and tried to steal from me. Thankfully, the cops got everything sorted out. The construction was halted, the crew had to fill in the huge pits they had dug, and the fake deeds were confiscated as evidence. I decided I wanted to make sure Jack didn't get away with this insane scheme. With the help of a lawyer, I sued him for trespassing on my property and fraud. Since Jack had already left town, I had to track him down to serve him the lawsuit papers. Once I did, he didn't even bother responding or defending himself. The judge ended up issuing a default judgment in my favor. I was awarded $75,000, which covered the cost of repairing the damage done to my property, legal fees, and some extra for pain and suffering. Not that the money could make up for the betrayal I felt after learning what Jack did. The courts also issued a criminal arrest warrant for Jack. A few months later, I found out from the sheriff's department that he had been tracked down in Nevada and extradited back to our county to face felony fraud charges. Jack ended up pleading guilty at his trial to avoid even more jail time. He got 2 years behind bars and will have a felony record for the rest of his life. Let's just say I learned a hard lesson about trust and keeping an eye on my property. When I finally have to leave this farm one day, you better believe I'm only leaving it in the hands of someone I can truly trust. I never thought my childhood friend could concoct such an insane scheme to try and steal my family's land. But sometimes people show their true colors when money is involved. At least I can rest easy now, knowing that he paid the price for his lies and deceit. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I had taken an R&D internship with a food company over the summer in Keokuk, the armpit of Iowa for those unfamiliar. For housing accommodations, the company had set me up in the local college dorm that had previously been a retirement home, so it basically had individual rooms and bathrooms, but one large commercial kitchen. It was summer, and the school didn't have a summer program but allowed 2 fall students to move in at the beginning of the summer. One was rarely there, but the other was constantly in the building and often had multiple friends over. Given the kitchen setup, we all stored our food there, and it's pretty much a no-brainer that you shouldn't take from others. However, immediately I noticed various food items going missing or being consumed regularly: sodas, empty cereal boxes put back on the shelf, etc. I initially posted a sign on the fridge asking people not to eat others' food, and also confronted both of them about the food going missing after the sign was up. Unfortunately, it didn't stop whoever was stealing my food, particularly when I'd head out of town for weekends. After complaining about the situation to my manager during my job, they helped me formulate the perfect pro-revenge plan. Since I was doing R&D work on food products, I was responsible for getting various ingredient samples to use for new recipes. My manager suggested I get some capsaicin extracts for my research, even though we weren't working on anything related to flavor profiles. Well, I found a company that had various Scoville unit extracts, and I asked for a variety to see what worked best for our applications. They certainly delivered, sending me small 2-ounce bottles of 50K, 100K, and 250K Scoville extracts. I ended up putting the 250K extract in a travel-sized spray bottle, mixed with some water to help as a carrier, and wearing gloves and a mask borrowed from work, I doctored the common food items that were being stolen with a liberal spraying of my mixture, mainly cereal, chips, crackers, a jug of milk, and the lip top of a few soda cans. For the snacks, I actually put some into a separate bag and left them open to dry before mixing them back into the original packaging. I did this in a different dorm room in my wing, as I knew well enough how potent this could be in enclosed spaces. I did this right before another trip out of town, and when I returned, I found that some of the chips, cereal, and milk were missing, along with 2 of the 3 cans of soda I had doctored. I never got to see the result, and no one ever said anything, but none of my food went missing for the remaining month of my stay. The next one is a petty revenge story. We once had neighbors who, from the day we moved in, absolutely hated us. We never even met them, but they made our lives hell in every way they could. We had moved to that area, putting my grad school and our big life plans on hold to look after my mother-in-law, who had stage 4 cancer, so it was already a crappy reason to move. And we hated the area. Rural California is very yeehaw in a bad way, if you know what I mean. The neighbors were garbage people and just awful to us. They never did anything illegal per se, but every petty thing you can think of to make our lives crappy, they did. For example, our water hose was on their lawn after I watered my roses by about 2 inches. It was coiled mostly on our side, but I wasn't done watering and just stepped into the house for a few minutes for a lunch break. While I was inside, they cut the 2 inches off it that was on their property and threw it in our yard, but left the rest of the hose that was on our side. Absurdly petty. They had never even met us or spoken to us. Finally, after about 2 years of this, I was talking with my across-the-street neighbor about it, and she told me they were treating us that way because they thought we were illegals. I'm Native American and my spouse is Hispanic, but they thought we were both Mexican. I asked her why they thought we were from Mexico, and she said before we moved in, some of our forwarded mail accidentally ended up in their box, and it had your Mexican address on it. New Mexico, we are from New Mexico. These idiotic racists thought we bought a home in an upscale neighborhood in coastal California with cash and came straight from Mexico to do it, so we must be part of a cartel and here illegally. They had concocted this whole narcos scenario because my husband's last name is Lovato. It's not, but a similar old Hispanic last name widely used. We are darker than they deemed appropriate. We bought our house with cash. We had sold our starter house, we put years of backbreaking work into renovating and made a killing on it. And they didn't know New Mexico is a ducking U.S. state. It was all so absurd. Don't worry, the story has a happy ending. When we moved out after my mother-in-law passed, I wrote them a long letter telling them how embarrassingly stupid they are. I'm native, so I was sure to tell them they were the ones trespassing on my land gained illegally by their government, and how they were giant a-holes for making what was already a hard time on my husband, who was dealing with the slow death of his mother, a highly respected physician in the area, so yeah, not an illegal cartel member. An even worse time. So I hope they're proud of themselves. Then we stole their cat. About the cat. They neglected him and left him outside covered in fleas and fending for himself day and night, in the terrible heat of summer without water, and in the freezing cold of winter without shelter. The cat had already moved in with us because we actually cared for it and we took care of his medical needs. In my book, you treat your cat like crap and you didn't microchip him, he's mine. So, one good thing came from our time there and he's napping in the windowsill right now. We named him Flavio after Flavio Mendez Santiago, the famous Mexican cartel drug lord. Duck racists. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This is a story from over a decade ago that has always stuck with me, and I was reminded of it by another post here. In 2011, my darling daddy had to have surgery to remove one of his kidneys due to a large cyst. 2 days after his surgery, while he was on the ward recovering, he began to feel unwell, but thankfully it was something he was used to that could be resolved easily, heart palpitations. Now, Dad has been having heart palpitations since the mid-90s, and while it was scary in the early days, by 2011 it was a really simple routine. Go to A&E and get an injection from the cardiac team at the hospital. Sometimes he would have a normal sinus rhythm, but would be having palpitations nonetheless, identified by the feeling in his body. The junior doctor on shift took an ECG and promptly informed him that he was not having a heart palpitation. He had a normal sinus rhythm. He tried to explain that he had been having palpitations for 15 years. He knows what a palpitation feels like, and that all she needed to do was call the cardiac team. This was a semi-regular occurrence, about once a year, and the heart nurses all knew him by name, and loved him. He's quite a character. The junior doctor refused to page the cardiac team, repeating that he wasn't having palpitations. For a couple of hours, Dad sat there in panic, getting more and more distressed. It was outside of visiting times, so he was alone. He told the junior doctor that he would make his own way to the cardiac team, and she told him, "If you leave the ward, we will consider you absconded and we will formally discharge you again." This was 2 days after losing a major organ. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. Dad called 999 from his hospital bed. When they asked for his address, he said, "That's an interesting question. Normally it's X but right now I'm on Ward X at XX Hospital." Shocked, the call handler asked what had happened, and Dad relayed the whole thing to them. The call handler escalated the call to a manager, who asked to speak to the junior doctor and gave her a massive dressing down. Her face grayed as she realized the gravity of what was happening. She immediately arranged for a porter to take him to A&E, UK emergency room, to be assessed by the cardiac team, and what do you know? He was, in fact, having palpitations, and had been for several hours. A quick injection later, his heart was back to normal, and we were all left stunned by the whole thing. I was in my 20s at the time, and Dad was my superhero, and seeing him crying in a hospital bed, looking so scared and small, will never leave me. I will never forget what that doctor did, and I'll never forgive her. She never even apologized to him or to us. Dad could probably have taken the hospital, the doctor, and the trust to court, but that's just not his bag, and he just let it go like water off a duck's back. 12 years later, and he's healthy and happy, but I honestly thought I might lose him because of an arrogant junior doctor and her stubbornness. The next one is an entitled people story. I've been with Walmart for almost 3 years now. I had an incident when I first started working where a creep found my social media through my name tag. After that, I changed my name tag to a different and traditionally male name. I'm non-binary, but I still dress and look feminine, so my preferred name often brings up a lot of questions, mainly from older folks. I've heard a lot of, "Your parents named you that?" and "Is your name short for something?" Think of my name tag being Dan, which is usually short for Daniel. Just an example of why people think my name tag is short for something. A few weeks ago, I transferred to a new store and the questions about my name started rolling in. Usually people accept that it's just a nickname, but I've had a few pushy people, this woman being the worst. She came into the store and asked for help finding an item. I was the only one in my department at this time, so I gladly helped her. She was maybe in her 50s, 60s, so the prime age to get asked about my name tag. I went through the usual explanation that it was just a nickname, and yes, my parents gave me a boy's name. That is a lie, but I live in a very religious area, so I'm not comfortable telling people I'm non-binary. She just didn't seem happy with my answers and kept demanding that I tell her my real name so she could address me properly or something. I kept saying that what she sees on the name tag is, in fact, my name. Eventually, she moved on, and I went about my day. I had the next 3 days off of work, and when I came back, my manager asked if I had issues with an older lady when I last worked. I had forgotten about her and said I didn't recall. Then he described how she had come into the store demanding a manager. She went off on some other department's manager about how some kid with dyed hair was lying about her name and needed to get punished for it. Something like the wrath of God, blah blah blah. I'm one of the few people with dyed hair in the store, and after pressing for more details from the lady, the managers found out she was talking about me. They said they didn't ban her from the store or anything, but that I could refuse her service and find someone else if she ever comes back to target me. My manager shared a quote from her. I don't remember it exactly, but it went along the lines of customers deserve to know the names of people they are paying to work for them. The next one is an entitled parent story. I, 30F, and my father, 64M, have historically had a rocky relationship. My parents divorced when I was 5, and he married the woman he cheated on my mother with. I was an only child, and she had 4 kids from a previous marriage. During my childhood years, I spent most of the allocated time dedicated to my father in the divorce with my paternal grandparents, every 2 weeks and 42 days in the summer. They lived in a different state. I cherished the time I had with them, and they would always go to bat for me. There was some tension caused early in my dad's new marriage due to my stepmom demanding that my GPs go back to the store one Christmas and get an equal amount of gifts for all of her children, even taking some from me and gifting them to her youngest. I spent many times waiting on my mom's sofa, waiting for my dad to pick me up, and he never did. I would later find out he was on family vacations with his new family. I could spend all day telling Cinderella stories, but I need to keep the focus on this story. My grandparents picked up his slack. We spent summers learning how to make baskets, gardening, camping, and various different activities. Their home was a second home to me. When I was 13, I went to live with my dad after some methodical brainwashing, and I then would rarely see my GPs. My GM would call, and they would ignore it. It would hurt my heart to see it on the caller ID, knowing they were just on the other line. But my dad and SM would not allow it unless I sat at a table with them while on a call. Fast forward to the summer of my freshman year, we went to visit my dad's side of the family. On the last night, my aunt and uncle, who lived next door, asked if I could stay the night with my cousins. My SM wanted her youngest daughter to be included. They declined because my SS was a thief. A fight ensued in the front yard that night, resulting in physical altercations. My stepmother shoved my 74 YO pap to the ground. He had a hip replacement in the 90s and already had a stiff walk. I was utterly terrified and distraught. As the chaos ensued, I packed my belongings because they said we were leaving. I vowed then that this would be the last straw, and I would never forgive them. We missed their 50th wedding anniversary because my stepmom was still upset over what his family did to her that night. The next spring, my pap had a stroke, and it was never the same. The man that helped raise me during his son's shortcomings didn't remember my name. He died in 2014. Later, I left home when I was 18 to go to college, where I met my husband. He has been my rock and helped when my dad throws fits in the last few years when he doesn't get his way. He has shown me nothing but unconditional love and support, and is the father to our child mine never could muster to be. I go no contact with Dad every couple of years because of his behavior. There is an old saying that time heals all wounds, but I don't believe that to always be true. I maintained a relationship with my mammy, paternal grandmother, until her death in December. She was a cheeky one who left notes for us to find after death. This woman never forgot a thing when she felt slighted. That also reflected in her will. I inherit the house that has been deeded to me since 2001. My dad knew they would give it to me, but I honestly think he thought he had a chance of fighting me for it. Since 2012, he and my SM have been living in an RV that is now starting to fall apart. He is a retired military, and he has no savings. Right after the funeral, he stashed his belongings in closets. I discovered this after I changed the locks and added cameras as I live out of state and wanted security for the home before I sell my house and move into my childhood home. I put his stuff and what was owed to him in storage, and my uncle gave him the keys. After learning this, he's been furious. My step-siblings keep reaching out, telling me I'm heartless for keeping him out of his parents' home. He called crying, and I coldly told him if they wanted him to have it, they would have left it to him. I also told him he should have treated his parents better when they were alive. I have the deed in my hands, and there's nothing left for him to do about it. The estate is almost settled, and what land he does get will also have my name on the deed. I would rather share my childhood home with my daughter and all the whimsical things it had to offer, even if my dad ends up homeless. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.